So imagine this scenario then, we've got a company that's perhaps, it understands its ICP, it's really clear on the personas it's targeting, and perhaps they've run some sort of product market fit surveys and they're coming back sort of pretty positively. So now it is the sort of time to perhaps put the gas on sort of outreach and sort of, generating those leads. What sort of marketeer would you suggest they hire then as a sort of first in full-time marketer?
Yeah, look, it's a great question, and it's sort of this notion of product market fit actually is being challenged a little bit now as to kind of exactly does it really exist, right? And how can you measure it? And and I've written actually about it because I think it is an interesting inflection point. But I guess what I would take from it is that as soon as you're starting to get traction, which is probably a different way of looking at it, and by traction I mean decent volumes of inbounds coming into your inbox and people genuinely interested in having a conversation. I think then you're looking at what I would deem a Jack or Jill of all trades. Mm. Right, that's the kind of way I would describe the candidate. And it's a difficult hire. Again, looking at UK and Ireland, SaaS is still relatively, new, and the sort of, we haven't had, 50 years of B2B SaaS, right? I go back to remembering the 56K dial-up analogy, right? I remember those days. I sold software in boxes. I sold software in retail stores. And I'm not that old, so it's still a relatively young kind of industry, and we haven't. It takes in most instances probably 10 or 15 years to kind of to get to kind of a liquidity event, be an exit or whatever. So we don't have huge volumes of these candidates in Europe, but this Jack or Jill of all trades would be what I would be hiring. I mean, I like this nuance of B2B instead of B2C because I think that's an important distinction. Because you'll find it very difficult to get someone that's ticking B2B plus SaaS plus marketing, and certainly not in your industry. So you're going to be conceding on loads of those. But I think if they don't know B2B, you run the risk of a B2C playbook, which becomes then full of energy, full of Instagram, full of kind of Snapchat, right, which is not what you need for B2B, right, and sort of so I think that's the key, the Jack or Jill of all trades that have got a bias for action, high octane, high energy, willing to get stuff done, don't need to be going to the CEO for everything. They can act autonomously, because that's the other point. The CEO isn't going to have the answers, and then you need someone that can work fairly autonomously and that can recognize like what's a reversible decision and what's an irreversible decision, and sort of. But I'm interested in your views, right? You're also hiring actively in the market, so keen to hear how you would approach it.
Yeah, I think these are the toughest hires to make, to be honest, because I think a lot of marketeers with these kind of skills know how challenging these sorts of roles are, because it's almost like a blank sheet of paper. You've really got to go out there and sort of create something yourself. But also you've got to have the ability, like you said, to manage up as well as actually be hands-on enough to get the work done, because you've probably got very little support. And then there's the pressure of obviously that sort of long-term versus sort of short-term piece. So, my view is always that, you've got to look at the soft skills first. So rather than focusing too heavily on, I need somebody who's done pay-per-click or content, or whatever it might be, focus on those soft skills. Because actually you don't necessarily know what your channels are going to be. This marketeer is going to start to come in and sort of hopefully identify maybe 2 or 3 channels that are going to give you a return, and start to build on it from there. So I think sometimes companies get a bit too focused on the actual hard skills, the knowledge in certain channels, rather than actually focusing on that. Has this person got the ability to actually do the many things within this kind of job, the strategic piece, the tactical piece, the budget management, the data, the creative, it's an all-encompassing role, really. And you touched on it perfectly. There are more SaaS businesses now than there ever are, and they're growing year on year, but that pool of talent isn't really growing that much. So, how do you find somebody who's already got the skills and who's already been there, who wants to just go and do it again for another business? There's so many exciting SaaS businesses out there. So I think the smartest companies are, certainly from what we're seeing, the smartest companies are kind of focusing on those softer skills rather than getting too focused on, we need somebody from SaaS who's done
I think that's a great point. Matt. I mean, I look at, when I look at CVs, I just don't look at the education piece anymore. It doesn't interest me. I do look at things like trying to unpack things like resilience, right? Because here's the point that you've actually made very well, right, which I think is worth looking on, is that you're dealing with profound uncertainty. Yeah. So this notion that you can write a brief that's saying they're going to be doing this and this and this, I find it really challenging, right, to write OKRs and performance management people into these early stage roles, because you come in the door and within a month the thing's completely turned on its head, right? So I think you're right. The key really is to focus on adaptability, bias for action, resilience, getting stuff done, which is sort of similar. They're the bits that I think are really key. Without putting you on the spot, I mean, I'd love your views on how you kind of unpack those in an interview, because they're the bits that I kind of find, when I go interviews, they're the bits that I really need to try and unpack. And I probably sometimes feel I'm not well equipped to kind of, unpack, is there a bias for action? Do they get stuff done? Are they going to be resilient? Are they going to be adaptable? Because often they don't have the track record. So you're trying to unpack it. I mean, I don't know. Have you any ideas as to how you would tackle it?
I think I think it's a difficult one. It is a difficult one. I think recruiting people will always be a bit of a risk, but I think it's more around the sort of questions that you're going to ask. Give me an example of a time when you did something. Give me an example, especially with sort of SaaS startups. Give me a time when you faced uncertainty in your role and the strategy changed. What happened? What did you do? How did you handle it? What did you learn from it? So I think it's perhaps asking some of those questions to the candidate. I think then on the flip side, it's making sure that you're referencing people externally who have worked with worked with candidates to get a view from their side. And then also, I think it's sort of giving a task to a marketeer at a later stage. Look, here's a real problem within our business that we're looking to solve. You don't want to be too ambiguous about it, because you don't want people going off on tangents. But here's a real problem. How would you fix it? And it's not that you're necessarily looking for them to come up with the perfect answer, but you're just looking for them to come up with something that's logical, something that can make sense. And I think by piecing all those sort of three things together, you'll get a sense of whether or not this person is right. But then also, I think there needs to be a little bit more support for these people when they go into businesses as well. So rather than it being sort of really short term, right, hang on, the leads are dropping, the pipeline's dropping a bit, what's happening? The CEO and the senior management team, the board, the leadership team need to also then give a little bit of breathing room to these marketeers, because these roles are challenging. And as you said, invariably the strategy is going to change a little bit at times. So, I think there needs to be sort of balance on both sides. But I think by covering those three areas, I think you'll perhaps narrow down a little bit more on these sorts of people.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, I mean, just to unpack a couple of those points, we're just kind of sharing a couple of ideas. So it's competency based. Totally agree. Anybody I bring through, I get them to do a Loom video. So I use Loom a lot, but I get, critique the website in 15 minutes. I want to hear you, if we want to grow traffic or grow leads, give me a 15-minute Loom video. Yeah. The other thing is I look for the digital footprint, which I think is, and the number of people I interview that are, I'm brilliant at, writing. Okay, well, great. I'm really, really good at writing. Okay. And where's the evidence, right? So if you're in marketing or sales, right, you should have a digital footprint. I mean, there was one person, senior salesperson, I couldn't find them on LinkedIn, and that was enough for me to go, you know what, that's a risk I'm not willing to take, because for me, you should have a digital footprint if you're in, in marketing and sales. Even if you're very junior, right, you should have at least a basic LinkedIn account that's got some content up there and write, okay? Because marketing includes the ability to write. So you don't have to be writing War and Peace, right? But you can certainly have a couple of blogs on Medium or something that just demonstrates evidence, right, of ability, rather than sort of trying to unpack it in an interview.
Yeah, and I think those sort of challenges should be exciting to the right sort of marketeer, because you should have an opinion on something. When you come to a website, generally, as I think as a B2B marketeer, you should be formulating an opinion on that website. So I think sort of sharing that sort of stuff should be quite exciting to marketeers.
Well, absolutely, Matt. And just kind of picking up on the other point, I think CEOs and board and so on need to be more patient, which again is the point you made earlier, because it's very easy to decide to churn a marketer out after a year, right? And that's often the case, right? The kind of the tenure of people in marketing is, you know, particularly in Europe, is probably 1 or 2 years. It's not five or longer, right? And there are exceptions, of course, but there's often we're not hitting our leads, right? And it's kind of, and there's this dance that goes on between product and sales and marketing, right? So marketing are probably not happy that the product's got enough compelling features to make it stand out in terms of positioning it in the marketplace. Sales aren't happy with the lead volume or quality. You kind of have this dance, right? But, you know, part of it is trying to be patient, because if you exit someone, you know, and I've had this with kind of leadership trying to exit someone, and I can see it's been exited prematurely, and then you're looking to try and go into a very challenging market to hire, and someone's spent a year building up their domain expertise, you've now lost them on kind of trumped up grounds that the lead velocity wasn't aligning with your business plan trajectory that secured your funding at the start. And you know, it's sort of it's an exit route for someone that actually hasn't done anything wrong, and then you're back to square one, trying to bring in somebody that doesn't know the industry and has to go through all that learning again. So there's some of the things that I kind of spot that just keep repeating, right?
You get into a tough cycle, don't you, really? So